So, hello guys to the next part, and in this part we will finish what we have done in the previous part. So basically we will fix that the player should start where we clicked our mouse, and also we will add this line that show us where we are pointing. So first thing I want to do is change the speed because it's too slow, so I will change it to 10, and I don't want to check it now, I will check it later. So first we want to have this to fix our player basically. So let's go to player controller, and once we are in this script, so maybe I will make it bigger because you can see the code more clearly. So I think that is okay enough, and you should see everything. So let's go down to the bottom, and I will add a method that is called reset player position. So it will be void because we don't want to return nothing. So let's write reset player pos. So I will write a shorthand for that. So here we want to reset the position, so we want to access the player current position, and we want to assign it to the position where we clicked our mouse, so it will be m-clicked position. So that should work, but there's one more thing that we have to do. I will show you the problem because you might have it often. First let's call it from somewhere. So let's go to the handle movement, let's go under to is pressed, it's true, and after we clicked the position, after we assigned the position where we clicked, we want to reset player position. So now it should reset each time that we clicked our mouse button. So let's go back to the project, let's play, and let's see what happens. So now if I clicked here, you can see that the ball transported there, and now if I drag it here, it should correctly move towards this direction. But there's one issue, it's not a problem, that if I now click here, for example, you can see that the ball is still going, and the reason for that is that the ball basically still has the information from the previous swipe. So if I click now, you can see that he's still going into the same direction because we didn't change it. So we have to also reset the direction of our ball. So let's go to the script and let's do that. So let's go at the end, and we want to basically change the velocity of our rigid body to be 0. So let's write vector 3 that's 0, and now it should work. So now we can actually move on to the making the line part. So let's go back to the project, and first let's add the new script, and we will not do it in the same script because I like to keep everything separated, and it's basically a better idea to keep everything separated. So we will name it player VFX. So this will be responsible for making all the graphic stuff for our player. And the reason I'm doing it separately because in order to move player, the player doesn't need to render the graphic stuff. And for example, if I put everything here, the player movement may not work correctly if I disabled the script because it's dependent on the graphics. But now if I keep everything separated, I can make this movement independent from the VFX stuff. So that's why I'm keeping it separated. So in player VFX script, we will need few things. So first, we want to have a prefab for our dot. So let's make a public game object variable that is called dot prefab, and this will be the dot that we will spawn. And also we want to add an integer for the amount of dots, so I will call it dot amount. And for now, I think that is it. So we will have to add one more private variable, and I will call it m_dot_gap. And basically this is a variable that will define what space should be between our dots. Like this will be easier to explain later, so we are not go into details now. So let's start from the start function. So in start function, I will assign the gap between each dot. So if we want to know what part of the whole line is one dot, we have to divide it, like we have to divide a full line by the amount of dots. So if you have, for example, a line that is made of 5 dots, and you want to know how many percentage is one dot relative to the whole line. So if you want to, it's 20% because you have 5 dots and one dot is 20%. And here we do the same thing. So we want to calculate this 20%. So we have a full line, which is 1, and we want to divide it by dot amount. And this will give us the percentage of one dot. So I will just write a comment. So it's the percentage of one dot relative to whole. And we will use it so we can basically make the gap between the dots. So we want to also have a function that is called spawn dots, and this will spawn our dots as the name suggests. And we will not use the update function for now, and let's rename it to spawn dots, and we will actually make the dots here. So we want to make an array of dots, so we have to specify it. So let's go here, and we will specify a private array of dots. So they will be a game object, and this means that they are array. And we want to write, we will call it dot array. So in spawn dots, we want to initialize this array. So we have to give it a value because array is fixed number, fixed size length. So we have to write new game object, and inside the square brackets we write the amount of dots, and this will be our variable dot amount. Now let's make a for loop which will create our lines. So for int I equals 0 till it's smaller than dot amount, and each time we will increment by 1. Where's my I? Okay. So let's write game object dot, and this will contain the newly instantiated dot. So we will call instantiate. We want to instantiate the prefab that we will drag into inspector, and we want to make it false. We want to set it, we want to disable it so it will not be visible. So let's call it dot.setActive, and we will set it to be false. And at the end we want to assign this to the array. So m.array with the current index, which is I, and we want to assign our dot to this. So now our dot array will contain all the dots that we just instantiated. So I hope you're not hearing my brother's music, but if you do, sorry for that, guys. Okay, so now after we spawned our dots, we want to make a function that will basically set our position of this dot. So we will call it void set dot pos, and it will take in two parameters, two arguments. So we want the start position and the end position of our line. So let's write vector 3 start position and vector 3 end position. And also this method will be public because we want to call it from player controller. So basically player controller will provide these two arguments, and it's public because we have to call it from outside this class. Okay, so we want to assign a position for each of the dot. So we first have to access the array. So we want to access each dot. So you make a for loop that goes from 0, that starts from 0, that goes till it's smaller than dot amount because it's the size of our array, and we want to increment each time. So first we want to get the current position of our dot. So we will assign it to a local variable, and I forgot one thing that I said that before. I used the underscore for the local variables, so I want to change it here. So let's go to the on dots and let's add underscore. I wouldn't do that, but to make a habit I will change it. Okay, so this will be called dot pos, dot position, and sorry for my cursor, and we want to get the current dot from the prefab from the array. So we will access the dot array with the current index of I. We want to get its transform, that position, and that's how we get the position of our dot. Okay, so now there's a more tricky part. So we want to calculate the target position. So we have to make a local variable that is called target pos, and now I will write the syntax and then I will explain it. So you want to have a lerp function that goes from start position to the end position, and then what is the t? So basically t is our current index times the gap between each dot. Okay, so to explain it, I hope you understand how lerp works. Basically you have two vectors that there's a start position and there's an end position, and the t value is basically defining where it should be between those two vectors. So if t is 0, it will be exactly the start pos, and if t is 1, it will be end pos. And here basically I'm just lerping the current dot. So imagine that you have the first dot, and the first dot index of I is 1. Like basically it's a 0, but I will give an example now. So I is 1, and we want to multiply by the percentage of it. So it will be 20% is 0.2. So this will be on 0.2 between the start pos and end pos. And when we come to the next iteration of the for loop, we get the index which is number 2, and we again multiply it by 0.2, and this time it will be 0.4 between those two, and then it goes to number 3, we multiply it by 0.2, we get 0.6, so now it will be closer to end pos, and it goes on and on till number 1, and that's why we have this dot gap, and this dot gap variable will change depending on how many dots we have that we specified in the inspector. but thanks to that syntax we can place them evenly on the line. So yeah, after we calculated the target pos, we just want to reassign the position of our target pos to the current dot. So this is not necessary when I think of that, so we can just delete it, but let's copy this part because we want to access again the current dot, so we can delete this, and we just want to assign the position of current dot to be our target position. And now it should basically work. So one more thing is that let's go back to the project and I will show you what I mean. There's one more mistake. So let's go to the player. Let's assign a script called player VFX. We want to add the prefab of our dot, so we can't add this player because we don't want to spawn the player each time. We want to basically have a new ball. So I will go to sprites, and now I will use this ball trail and I will drag it somewhere on the screen. I will change the sprite color to be maybe exactly the same as this. So I'll pick the picker, choose the picker, and choose this color. So now I will call it .prefab, and I will drag it to our prefab folder. So that's how we created a prefab of our dot. So let's delete it from the scene because we have it in our project. And let's click on the player. Let's assign this dot into .prefab. We want the dot amount to be 5. And now it's not working because we are not calling this function that we just made anywhere. So let's go to the player controller and now we can call it. So let's go up and I will define a private reference to our player VFX. So it will be player VFX. Oh my gosh, what is this? Player VFX. And let's write m._player VFX. And let's go to the get component and let's write m.player, and we want to get the component. And component that we want to get is player VFX. And I will move it up because I like to keep get components closer to each other and keep this separated because this is outside from the other game object. So now once we have this reference to player VFX, we want to go into handle movement, and now we want to create a third if statement when we are holding the mouse button, because that's the place where we want to make our line appear. So I will call it if input data that is held, that we did at the beginning of this series. So if we are holding our button, then we want to access the player VFX script, and specifically we want to access set.pos. So we want to set pos position. So first we want to pass in the start position. Start position is basically our click position, and the end position is the place where our cursor is currently hovering. So we have to access a camera. So we want to access our camera variable. We want to use screen to world point function because we want to translate the current mouse position from pixel coordinate to toward coordinate from pixel coordinate. So this should give us the current position where our mouse is currently hovering on in world position and world coordinate. So this should be it. So let's see. Let's go back to the project and let's see if it's worked. So if I click play, and now if I click somewhere and it doesn't work, the question is why. So let's check. I will click on maximize on play. I want to check if they are even spawning. So as you can see, they are spawning here, and yeah, they are not active. So we want to make them active before we draw the line. So let's go back to the player VFX script, and we want to add a new method that is called make.active. So let's make a function that will be public, because we also want to call it outside this class. So it will be called make.active. Okay, I think there's a better name. So I'll change the name to change dot active state. So basically, because when I was making this game first, I made two functions that were called make.active and make.disabled.active. And now if I think about it, it's not a good practice. You should have one script, one method that like do the both. So this will change the active state of the dot. So we will take in a boolean, which will be called state, and we will pass in either true or false. So if you are passing true, you want to make dots active, and if we are passing false, we want our dots to be disabled. So here we want to make a for loop, because we want to make each dot active or disabled. So it will start from 0, it will go till it's smaller than dot amount, and again increment each time. So let's go to the next line, and now we want to access the array of dots passing the current I index, and we want to get into setActive method that is on the game object, and we want to pass in the state that we will provide. So now let's go to the player controller, and we want to make dots active when we press our input, when we press our mouse button. So where do we do it actually? So we can call it after we reset player position. So let's call it m.playerVFX, and we want to call make change.active state, and we want to pass in true because we want to make it active, and we want to make it disabled once we release our mouse button. So let's click here, let's go down here, and let's paste it here, and I will change the type, the argument to be false, so we'll make it false. Okay, so let's see, let's go to the project, let's see if it works. So let's click here and let's drag it out, and it's still not working, and I don't know why. So, but as you can see, look at this. So now it's disabled, and if I click, they're enabled. So this is working correctly, but they are not showing up. And but to be honest with you, I don't know why. I have to check it, so I will pause here, and I want to check the position of this dot. So one dot is here, second one is also here, so they are all under our player ball, and we don't want that. So what is the problem? Let me go back to the player VFX, and let me check what I've done wrongly. Okay guys, so I found the problem. So basically it didn't lerp correctly because the dot gap was 0, and the reason why it was 0 because I have 1 divided by dot amount, and both 1 and dot amount are integers, and when you divide integers they will give you the int as the result of calculation. And in order to keep the floating points, we have to either change one of them to be float. So I will just add f to this one, and now basically the computer knows that this is a float and this is an int, and we want to get the floating number from this calculation, so it will keep the rest of the calculation, because when you divide 1 by 5 it's 0.2, but when you convert it into int it will round it down, and that's why it was 0. So now I just had a debug log thing to log me the dot gap, but now it should work correctly, so just change one thing here. Let's go back to the project and let's see if it works. Okay, so as you can see, it works perfectly well. You can see that we have the dots that they are showing up here, and yeah, it's super nice. So as you can see, we have 4 dots and we wrote 5, and the reason for that is that 1 dot is actually inside the player, and if you don't want that, we can fix it later, but I prefer it that way. But this is too long, so I will keep it in the next part. So, but it's working, so it's very nice. So see you guys in the next one. I will definitely split it like into 2 parts, but I don't know, we'll see. So goodbye.